Hey everyone, Kennedy Ock here again to talk about some aspect acumen. In the last video we talked just after the Wasp pack dropped about different little packages within the aggression aspect that you can use to build your deck. I mentioned in that video you're probably also going to want some basic packages. So this is the video post Wasp pack overviewing those basic options and how I sort them into different packages to decide where to place them in the deck. Again, if you didn't watch that last video, what I'm doing is taking little packages of 3 to 4 cards, maybe even 2 cards, combining a bunch of those with a hero kit to make a deck. So I'm going to go over the basic aspects, and then in the next video, I'm going to build a deck for Wasp using these little aspect acumen packages. All right, so I've got lots of different options here. You'll see there's 2 packages up here for ally support. I think there's sort of 2 different routes you can go. There's going to be some cards that are in many packages, and one of those is Mockingbird. She is just a really efficient basic card that was in the core sets that, honestly, if you could include her in every deck, you probably should, because she is that good. Status conditions rule this game, especially at lower player counts, and she is amazing. She basically acts as 2 stuns with a thwart in the middle. You play her, stun the villain, use her for 1 thwart, chump block the villain for the other player in 2-player, or save her for the next turn for chump blocking in solo. Just an amazing ally. So I threw her in ally support because I think it makes sense. What I'm talking about in this left-hand ally support 1, that's like healing allies. So we've got first aid to keep our allies alive. We've got honorary avenger to act as sort of like a cheaper first aid, right? First aid technically costs 2 resources. Honorary avenger costs 1, but you can't cycle it through your deck because it sticks on the ally. I mean, if you expend the ally fully, you'll use it eventually. But it's about the same ratio, which is kind of nice. It also combos into a lot of other stuff. It helps thin your deck, so really good card in general. The other form of ally support is more Avengers focused. So we've got Earth's Mightiest Heroes. These 2 sets can obviously combine together. If you want to give Maria Hill the Avengers trait so that you get Earth's Mightiest Heroes off her, you can. We've got Avengers Tower, and we've got Team Building Exercise. I'm not saying if you're going to include the ally support package, you have to include all 3 cards. It might only make sense to include 2 of these. Maybe you don't have a bunch of cards that share a trait with you, or maybe you want this, but you don't have Avengers. Maybe you're playing Ms. Marvel with Champions. Totally fair game for you to take a couple of these aspect packages or basic packages, combine them together, and then remove a few cards at the end. A lot of times when I'm combining these, I'll end up with like 41, 42 cards, so I'll have to remove a couple to get down to my efficient 40. Alright, next I'm going to go over the resource sort of packages. So first we have long game money. And what I mean by this are big costing supports that are going to buy you income and card draw for the remainder of the game. These are cards you want to mulligan for, you want to get down fast. So I have Helicarrier, Avengers Mansion, and I put the Power of All of Us in there because these are really expensive cards that can hit your tempo pretty hard against villains that throw things at you right away like Claw. So you're probably going to want something to accelerate them later in the game if you can't afford them early game. Over here on the side, we have some optional cards or some like possible swap-ins. You could be running Quinn Carrier instead of Helicarrier if you're in solo, or if you're the person that favors one resource type. So this is a long money game. They're not going to get you a lot of benefit right away, but over multiple turns, you're going to see the power of these cards really strongly. Next, we have instant income. So this is just the 3 basic resources. There's pretty much not a deck that doesn't want these 3 basic double resources in them. Maybe Black Panther doesn't want all 3 because he's got Vibraniums. They're just really good cards that are useful in almost every situation. You can get too many resources in your deck. If you include all 3 instant income resources, along with the Power of All of Us, and the Power of Aggression, and Pim Particles, like the case is in Wasp's deck, you can end up with 9 resources in your deck. That's like a quarter of your deck is just resource cards. That might be a little bit too much. So there's a case where you might not want this instant income package in full. Next, we have our slow drip resources. I call them these because they're really good resources, but they drip out slowly over time. So we have all 3 enhanced resources. Obviously, you're probably not going to put all 3 of these in your deck. And these actually combine really well with Power of All of Us to spread the Power of All of Us out over multiple turns. What you are going to do is probably pick the one that's important to you if you are in favor of this slow drip process. These can actually be really powerful because they'll thin your deck if you play them right before you cycle. They'll also provide you that boost you need, right? It's like a Helicarrier for 1 cheaper, but you only get to use it 3 times. Seems pretty good. I put resourceful in here as an optional slow drip resource if you care about wild resources or you care about economy, right? Maybe you're Hulk and you can't afford all these 2-cost cards because it leaves you with that awkward 1 card left in Hulk land. Resourceful is like a great thing to fill in that slot. Moving on. Let's look at allies next. So I've got these allies that I call building blocks allies. So they're blockers and builders. War Machine, super efficient blocker. I mean, he costs 4, which is quite a bit, but with his toughness, and then his 4 thwarting probably, and then his chump block, he ends up becoming a really efficient character. I mean, he replaces a 4 justice, an invulnerable, and a chump block. That's really good. We've got Mockingbird. Already talked about her. She is really great at helping you build your board state, helping you maintain hero form, and stunning the villain. And then I put assess the situation, because if you're going to be staying in hero form and using these characters to chump block for you, your hand size is going to be down a little bit. So I like to run assess the situation when I'm including those two to stay in hero form, because it helps me keep my hand size up a little bit and see more cards in my deck when I need them or when I need to play these expensive allies. Next, just like in aggression, we've got our chump and dump row. I put that as Spider-Man, Ironheart, and Mockingbird. They aren't exactly chump and dump, but they're pretty close. So you can play Ironheart. She's obviously a chump and dump. You draw a card, you thwart for 1 or attack for 1, block with her. As efficient as she can be. Mockingbird's a little bit less so. You play her, stun the villain, thwart. You could block with her that round against another attack from the villain, but you're better off keeping her for 1 more round. So they're not just like block instantly, but they have those enter plays abilities that make them less efficient their second turn. We've got Spider-Man here, same thing again. You put him into the board for 3. He deals 4 damage to something. You block with him. You could keep him around for another turn to thwart for 1 or attack for 2, but if chumping keeps you in hero form, he's the way to go. Alright, next we have our damage on the fly. So this is damage that you might need to add to your deck. Maybe you're a character that has a lot of thwarting potential like Black Widow, but you don't have a lot of damage. You're not running aggression, so you really need to include some damaging events to make sure you can burn that villain down. I think Haymaker is not that bad of a card. I used to think it was pretty horrible, but honestly it costs 2, it has a great resource type, and it can fit into a lot of hands that otherwise might be dead turns, so I'm coming around on Haymaker. Not included in every deck, but in ones that have low minion clearing damage, especially for those low health minions. You always want something that can clear those 2 and 3 health minions so you don't have to waste your big attacks on them, because that's what really stinks. I've got Spider-Man in here again because he's just great for pumping out a little bit of damage just when you need it. He can swing for 4, he can swing for 2 later if you keep him in play. Not too bad of an ally. And then I put Lockjaw in here because he's like the ultimate on the stick or on the fly damage source. You can spend him as a resource early in the game, knowing that worst case scenario, if you need 2 damage or 2 thwart later in the game, you pay 4 resources, throw him into play, he takes care of something for you. So I think Lockjaw is another card that can fit into a ton of decks, especially in standard and expert mode, that a lot of people overlook. So I would definitely consider including Lockjaw in your decks. Alright, and now we have our game changer allies. I'm talking about the Nick Furies of the world, I'm talking about the Heimdalls. These are characters that you can build an entire deck around, whether you're trying to rapid response Nick Fury to draw a ton of extra cards every turn, or you're trying to really game that encounter deck and know what's coming up and discard the cards that are a problem for you. These allies are really, really, really strong. The problem with that is they're really expensive. So I included the Power of All of Us with them. It's a little bit shaky, right? Because you're including 2 resources and 2 allies that are expensive. But if you combine this with other sets that like the Power of All of Us, you're building your cost curve high enough that the Power of All of Us is beneficial. I got some spy stuff down here. I'm not saying you need the spy trait to play target acquired. Don't get me confused. But it benefits people with the spy trait a little bit more. It benefits people that are going to be running Coulson. It benefits Black Widow, obviously. You could definitely include this, and probably should, in other characters if you're expecting a lot of boost icons. And then Espionage. What can I say? I really trashed this card when it first came out, but I think I have totally come around on it. I mean, you're paying 2 resources to draw 2 cards later, but if you have dead cards in your hand and you can play Espionage, almost always worth it. And having an 8-card hand and a 4-card hand is better than having 2 6-card hands. So if you spend 2 resources earlier to reduce your hand size for that turn, having 8 cards in your hand or 7 cards in hero form is a bigger boon, I think. Alright, We haven't gone over these piles over here, so let's get through those. We have the Hero Sustain package. This is another package that I include in a lot of decks. Endurance, downtime, first aid, pretty self-explanatory. What you're doing here is trying to circumvent having to thwart. You're trying to stay in hero form as long as possible, right? Endurance is just a really good first aid, but you can only play it once. Downtime is for when you have to go to Alter Ego form. You don't want to spend multiple turns there recovering, so you just downtime for one really big recover and hopefully pop back into hero form for the rest of the game. We got our Thwart Bump spelt incorrectly. That's cute. This package is one that I don't run a ton, but I have run it in some decks. So it's got To the Rescue in it, which is the basic thwart event that removes 2 threat from a scheme. Could be really good with Miss Marvel, but I mean, it's still just a downgraded sneak by, so not that amazing. And then Emergency. Emergency is a card that has actually come around on me, especially in solo, against those villains that have low threat thresholds like Crossbones and Rhino, where just losing one scheme can totally ruin your day. And Rhino you actually lose, and Crossbones it upgrades him and progresses the scheme to potentially an even smaller threshold. I think these cards can be really, really useful, but a little bit situational. And then finally we have like the truly situational stuff here. We've got Warning, a card that I have never used and probably will never use because the defense ruling is bad. Well, it's bad for Warning. We've got Athletic Conditioning. This card would be amazing as a preparation or as a condition upgrade, but as an event, not so great. I mean, you have to have Stunder Confused and draw into it at the right time, which is not very likely. At the same time, you could just run a Haymaker, and for 1 extra resource, you could clear Stun, if that's your problem. And at the end of the day, Haymaker is useful when you don't have Stunned, whereas Athletic Conditioning is just a dead mental resource in your deck. Tenacity, a card that's really good for those stat-pumping heroes. And I say really good in the lightest of terms. Obviously, Earth's Mightiest Heroes is a way better readying card if you have the Avenger straight. Tenacity can be an okay card if you want to get out, 10 crazy attacks in one turn. Some more situational cards here. We've got the Sorcerer Supreme, obviously only usable by Doctor Strange and soon Scarlet Witch. We've got Swarm Tactics, our first team-up card. Again, this is only situational because it's usable by Ant-Man and the Wasp only. With them, it's an amazing card, so definitely use it. And then we've got Invulnerable. That's another card, like Warning. I can't find a reason to play this. Maybe someday there'll be a hero that gets, big buffs if he attacks or she attacks when they have a tough status, but we just don't have that yet. There's not enough reason to pay 3 to give your hero tough when you could just use War Machine in that case anyway. You could try doing something cute in, Risky Business Expert when Green Goblin 3 flips and deals 4 to your hero. You could try to absorb that with Invulnerable because all those defense cards don't work with it. But you're probably better off just playing 2 first aids, which is the same cost, or having a med team, or playing an endurance and getting the same result for way cheaper. So, situational cards. All right, so those are the basic packages. Next, I am going to build a Wasp aggression deck using this Aspect Acumen approach. Hey everybody, we are going to try to build a Wasp aggression deck using this Aspect Acumen approach. Just as an example, I'm going to attach this to the end of the basic video, but also probably list it as its separate video. So if you've already watched that full basic packages video, you can skip this one because you've already seen a big chunk of it. So what we're going to try to do, like I said, is build a Wasp deck. So let's go over Wasp really quick, just her identity card. The coolest thing about Wasp that a lot of people overlook is Wasp has 3 unique abilities. With Ant-Man, all of his abilities are very similar, right? When you change into this form, get a benefit. So obviously you want to build his deck around changing forms as much as possible to optimize his ability. Nadia is different. So Nadia's 3 abilities are all very distinct. You could build a deck focused just around one of those abilities. For example, the girl ability, you could build a deck with all mental resources so you can put the exact right cards into your deck at the exact right time. Really cool. You could build it around 2 of those abilities. Maybe you're going to focus on Girl and Giant Form, which lets you spread damage around. Or you could build about all 3 abilities. The one that, when you defeat something, lets you ping the villain. So you're going to want to bring lots of AoE damage. You're going to want to bring lots of stat pumping stuff, and you're going to want to bring lots of mental resources. Building around all three, in my experience, has been a mistake. So I'm going to try to build around just one today, and I'm going to favor mental resources to like sort of help with the girl ability, but I'm not going to like force that one. So I'm going to really focus on Wasp's giant form, which lets her spread damage and thwart potential. Okay, we're going to mainly focus on damage because we're playing aggression. What else would we do? But what sort of things would match a character that wants to spread damage from their base attack? Obviously, the first thing I'm going to do is add big swings. So, like I said, you don't have to include 3 copies of everything. I'm going to include 3 copies of Skilled Strike. I'm going to include 2 copies of Mean Swing. You can see here now we've included a ton of cards that aren't mental resources, so we really can't focus on that girl ability too much. But with Yarnbjorn out, a Mean Swing, and a Skilled Strike, we can get our base attack up to 7 to spread between minions and a villain. That's pretty good. So I'm going to dump those into my deck bag here, or into my deck. So I'm up to 21 cards with just that. Next, I think I'm going to include this Hero Sustain. So we've already included the Skilled Strike, but I can grab these other 2 cards from it. Obviously, they combo well because they both include 1 paired card. We're going to want to include at least 1 copy of Combat Training, and I'm going to include all 3 copies of Moment of Triumph. The reason for this is that it's going to let me sustain Hero Form, like the title says. It's going to allow me to be able to ignore thwart a little bit in aggression because I'm going to stay in hero form for as long as possible. If I get to that 7 attack I mentioned in the last turn, you can blow up an Ultron drone and heal for 6. That's really going to let you sit in giant form for as long as possible. And since your hand size is 5, that's not the end of the world. All right, what else would be good to include in one of these decks? What I'm thinking is, there's lots of good choices here. I think including the Stuns and Guns package might be kind of nice, but I also think we need some allies. So I'm going to throw the Chump and Dumps in there. They're not, the best of the best cards here, but they're going to let us sustain hero form a little bit more than what we just did with the sustaining package. We're up to 28 cards. At this point, I'm going to take one of the cards that in that other video I mentioned as being situational, Power of Aggression. I think this is kind of essential just because of, let me show you it here. They switched those buttons on me, and I am not pleased. All right, I think that Power of Aggression is kind of essential with Wasp, just because you don't have a ton of energy resources. I mean, we have Moment of Triumph. That's not that great, but it lets us pump Wasp to slightly higher stats. So she's not quite just a chump and dump, but she also isn't nothing. All right, so we are at 30 cards. I think at this point, I'm going to throw all of this into a deck bag, save it, and we will jump over to the basic table and grab some basic packages to fill in those last 10 cards. So we've got our 30-card deck loaded into the basic table, and we've got to figure out what we want to finish this out. I want to quickly look at the allies that we included, because I think there'll be something pretty cool we can do to really optimize this deck where we're trying to just focus on using Wasp's basic stats to spread as much damage out as possible. We're going to be the minion controller, we're going to be the damage dealer, all of the above. Cool. So with Combat Training, we can get Wasp up to 3 base attack, and then with those Skilled Strikes, it can be even more and even more and even more. So one really good thing we can do with that is make sure that we can ready as much as possible. And one of the ways we do that is by including Ally Support 1. I am not going to include Team Building Exercise. Instead, I'm just going to include Avengers Tower and Earth's Mightiest Heroes. I'm going to put in 3 copies of Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Obviously, this is unique, so I can only include 1. This is going to let me play Spider-Girl and then use her as a battery to just keep readying Wasp and using that damage over and over again. So we're up to 34 cards. I'm also going to include part of the ally support package here. So again, we're going to add Mockingbird to our list of allies because she's really good at helping us hero sustain, which is something we talked about wanting to do. I'm going to include 3 copies of Honorary Avenger. You can use those on Wasp in a pinch, but you can also use those on Brawn and on Mockingbird, so you can get to that 5 ally limit with Avengers Tower, and it also lets you use them for readying, which is really important. So Wasp has really expensive cards in her kit, so we're going to make sure to include our instant income package. So we're up to 36, 41. I think at that point we're going to have to cap things off and see what we can cut. I think a lot of times what I decide to cut is sort of just dependent on how my first couple games goes, but we'll look through here and see if there's anything that's pretty obvious to cut. You know, looking through this, I'd be willing to cut one copy of Power of Aggression. I think that's what I'll do to make this a 40 card deck. The reason I say that is we've got a lot of resources already. 2 Pim Particles, 1 Power of Aggression, and the 3 basic resources. That's 6 resources right off the bat. Yes, Wasp's kit is kind of expensive, but the cost curve of the cards we've included is actually fairly cheap. Just looking through here, those are all 0 cost. We've got 1 cost. The cards that we're putting into the deck, I think the only ones that cost more than 1 are Allies and Avengers Tower. So we're on the cheap end of cards added to our deck, so I don't think we need to like go all out on resources. But I think it'll still be pretty fun. One card that I haven't included yet is Swarm Tactics. I'd probably try to fit that in there after a couple games if I can fit it. Maybe it replaces Earth's Mightiest Heroes. It's not free, but it lets me change forms to get that little ping in and then flip back and stay in giant mode as long as possible. So it might be a beneficial card. But overall, I think this setup is pretty fun. So I'll try to play this deck on YouTube in the next couple weeks, and we'll see how it goes. The damage spreading Nadia aggression deck. Hope you guys enjoyed this way of building decks using different packages or combos of cards. For me, it's a lot more visual to say, okay, I'm going to have this bunch, and this bunch. I'm going to combine it with this bunch, and this bunch, rather than just, you know, dumping all your cards on the table, even though that's kind of what it looks like in TTS right now. So tune in after Quicksilver releases. I've had him for a couple weeks now because I imported him, so I will have a Aspect Acumen protection video ready to go, hopefully the day after Quicksilver releases. All right, thanks for tuning in, everybody.